Hi, everyone. Today we are talking about Chapter 4, Rome from City State to World Empire. By the end of this chapter, you'll be able to explain the rise of Rome, what made that happen, and what made it fall, and some of the key people in between that had a hand in both. So on this slide, you have your handy chronology that you can see starts with 509 BC and ends with 476 AD. So we are covering a lot of time and territory here. Rome became a republic in 509 BC when the landed aristocrats and patricians overthrew the Etruscan king around the end of the 6th century. The end of the 6th century BC, I should say. The last king before Rome became a republic was Tarquin the Proud, also known as Lucius Tarquinius Superbus, who ruled by tyranny. I always get cracked up when I see that name because it reminds me of the Roadrunner cartoons, where it would say his scientific name was Fasticus Burticus or something like that. Anyway, Lucius Tarquinius Superbus. Not only did he think he was superb, he told everyone else to think he was too. And you can do that when you're a tyrant. How Tarquin came into power is really the interesting part. He married a princess named Tullia, who was the daughter of Servius Tullius, Rome's 6th king. But only after the two got together, the princess and Tarquin got together to arrange to kill her husband. That was step one in their grand plan. Step two was to kill her father. So this woman, Tullia, has conspired to kill her husband and her father in order to put Tarquin on the throne. So they did kill her father. And afterward, it said that Tullia ran over her father's dead body in her chariot, splattering his blood everywhere. So that's adding insult to injury, right? However, in addition to this just crazy lack of respect for her father or humanity in general, it was also super scandalous that she even rode in a chariot. Women just didn't do that back then. So lots of drama around that whole situation. As the new king, Tarquin removed everyone who was against him from the Senate and established himself as dictator, like the tyrants of Greece during that period of time would normally do. Obviously, Tarquin was rather ambitious and willing to do just about anything to expand his kingdom. He established Rome as the head of the Latin League, which came in more as a military type of organization. Tarquin signed a treaty with Carthage that recognized Rome as a military power. Legend says it that the rape of Lucretia by Tarquin's son Sextus led to his downfall. She committed suicide after the attack, and her husband vowed to avenge her death. We don't have a lot that's really documented about this story other than other romanticized tales that have followed. The growth of the Roman constitution was fueled by conflict, much like our own constitution was fueled out of conflict. Where our conflict was with England, the Roman conflict was within Rome, Roman society between the patricians and the plebeians. The patricians were nobles, the plebeians were commoners. And because these two groups made up the social order of Rome, this conflict is called the struggle of orders. The plebeians were not demanding a lot. All they wanted was some kind of debt relief other than being sentenced for life to slavery. Because you know how it is. Once you get in debt, it's hard to work your way out. So these people would be sentenced to slavery to pay off their debt, which would lead them to basically not be able to work to earn funds. So then they were constantly in debt. It reminds me of high interest credit cards today, those with like 28% interest or higher. And payday loans were a thing back in the day where you could go to like a check cashing facility, not like a bank or anything, but businesses set up specifically for advancement on your payday. So you could go in and you could take a check stub and you could tell them you needed, I don't know, $100 until next Friday. And they would have you fill out some paperwork and you'd leave there with your $100. But when you went back the next week, you might have to pay a lot more than that, a lot more than common interest might be. You might expect like maybe 10% interest or something like that. Sometimes they were upward of 200% interest on these payday loans. They're actually illegal now in Arkansas. So basically, back to Rome, basically, the more money you had, the more control you had over the people of the lower class. So these people, the plebeians, really could never ever get ahead. They were truly the working poor. So, how can the little guy, this poor man, get the attention of the wealthy landowners who pretty much control everything? Well, the plebeians threatened to secede. So, if the plebeians seceded, the patricians would lose their tax revenue. Now, initially, you might think that's not going to be a big deal because they can't afford to pay their taxes some of the time anyway. But guess who they borrowed that money from? And guess who benefited from the free labor of loaning them that money? That's right, the patricians. So the patricians stood to lose taxes and some free labor if the plebeians balked too much about all of this. So early in the 5th century BC, the plebeians continue to argue for representation and they get their own assembly, which later is made bigger and the name is changed to the tribal assembly. In about 450 BC, the 12 tables codify the first Roman codes of law. By 287 BC, the plebeians have obtained civic equality. So in the grand scheme of things, yes, it took more than 200 years for this equality to happen. But the reason it was able to happen is that the Roman Constitution grew with the country's needs. It was very specific in the rules that were made for the Constitution. The US Constitution is largely based on abstract concepts like life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And if we were all together in a room and I said, what's your idea of life? What's your idea of a great life? What's your idea of happiness? What's your idea of liberty? We might have some similar answers, but to a degree, they would all also be different. So that's very abstract in our Constitution. We have legislative ways to change and alter our Constitution, but the base remains the same. It's based on abstract concepts of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The Roman Constitution was designed to be fluid all along. They added laws as things changed and they needed to address different things. The role of government during this time was to maintain domestic order, to maintain military might, which is important because you have to be able to fight for yourself, and to have dignity in international affairs. So I like this slide because it shows that Romans valued family. Now, how does it show that? So this is technically a sculpture displaying sculptures, if you can see it that way. So this is a sculpture of a man who is proudly displaying two sculptures of his ancestors. They very much valued family and tradition and also valued city. City life was important at the time. So devotion to Rome gave armies a chance to unify Italy and then to begin conquering the rest of the Mediterranean world. Then by 146 BC, Rome had dominated the region. But Rome was afraid of Carthage, which is in the northwestern part of Africa in what is now known as Tunisia. So they started a war with Carthage and beat them in what is now known as the Punic Wars. There were a series of 3 wars that resulted in the destruction of Carthage and the enslavement of its people. When taking over Greece, Rome was impacted by Greek immigrants, their traditions and their culture, which led to the Hellenization of Rome. With such broad territory and wealth, exploitation and corruption also starts to run rampant. Okay, we'll show you this slide. This is just a Roman warship relief. But the one I really want to show you is this map. This conquest of Italy gave Rome the manpower that it needed to expand throughout the Mediterranean world. In the Second Punic War, Rome defeated its greatest rival, Carthage, which you can see right there, the tip right there. Okay. So remember, Hellenistic means Greek-like or Greek-ish. So across the Roman Republic, people began assimilating to some of these Greek-ish values and ideas, including ideas proposed by Cicero, who said that reason was the most noble faculty. Cicero was a Stoic, and Stoicism was the philosophy that really ruled during the Pax Romana. As a Stoic, he believed that natural laws governed the universe. And according to natural law theory, all people have the same inherent rights, the same basic rights, which really resonated with our founding fathers and had influence on the formation of our own Constitution. So in our Constitution, these inherent rights are referred to as inalienable or unalienable. So let's talk about that word. In or un means not. Alien means foreign, and able means able or capable. So when we talk about our Constitution, the rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, these unalienable rights, they're so much a part of us that they're not capable of not being part of us. They are not capable of being foreign. So that's another way to say inherent. And also included on here some quotes by Cicero, because some of the best quotes come from these Stoic philosophers, and Cicero is no exception. So what goes up must come down, and the same is true with the Roman Republic. The main reason for the fall of the Roman Empire was that the Roman elite showed very little concern for the welfare of the masses. You know, it's called elite for a reason. There aren't many elite people. So there are many more people who were not elite. The fact that the elite did not care for the masses became a problem. Tribunus Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus, who were brothers, tried to reform an agricultural revolution that had ended up producing landlessness, but they were murdered. Julius Caesar became dictator, but was assassinated. In the last years of the Republic, there was civil war among those who wanted to succeed Caesar. So just to touch on Julius Caesar a little bit, he was one part of a triumvirate, this ruling group of three that conspired to take over Rome. The other two were General Pompey and Crassus, a banker. Caesar came from an ancient noble family, and that's very important when you talk about a triumvirate. There are three aspects that are very important to leadership. One, military power. Two, money. And three, nobility. So among these three, they had all of that covered. But Caesar ended up proving to be a brilliant military general during the conquering of Gaul on his own. He grew his wealth by plundering, like most military leaders at that time did. The triumvirate fell apart actually when Crassus died, which left Pompey and the Senate being very afraid that Caesar just had too much control, and they demanded he give up command. So instead, Caesar took his troops into Rome, and the Senate said, whoa, 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 hey, we'll just make you dictator for 10 years. How about that? So, ta-da. So Caesar becomes Roman dictator, and he was actually killed on March 15th, 44 BC, which is what Shakespeare in his play, Julius Caesar, calls the Ides of March. So when you hear someone or you see a meme float around on March 15th that says, beware the Ides of March, that's what we're talking about here. So it was Augustus who began restoring Rome. His name was really Octavian, but he chose the name Augustus because it was a revered name, and he wanted to be known as the princeps, or the first citizen, rather than the emperor. In choosing this name, Augustus really wanted to let people know that he was there to serve them. As first citizen, he kind of puts himself among them. You know, he's at the top because he's the first, but he's among the citizenry, and he wants to let people know first and foremost that he is there to serve the welfare of the people and to revitalize work values and civic spirit. So he starts these reforms to protect the empire from overly ambitious generals too. Another reason that he wanted to let people know he wanted to work for their welfare is because he didn't want to end up like Caesar. No one wanted to end up like Caesar. Octavian, as Augustus, ushers in a 200-year period of peace known as the Pax Romana, or the Roman peace. Naturally, this period of peace extended well beyond Augustus because he didn't live forever. Of these other emperors, there are two that I want to mention that had a long-lasting influence. Antonius Pius did two important things. He limited a master's right to torture slaves, and he introduced the concept of innocent until proven guilty. And then Marcus Aurelius is another important ruler who came about during this time period, who contributed the principles of Stoicism to society, and today is pretty much remembered as a philosopher, as a Stoic philosopher. And I've already mentioned that Augustus really wanted to avoid Caesar's fate. He also wanted to grow the territory, but it was very important for him to keep the peace at home as well. So Stoicism, just to talk a little more about that, Stoicism was the principal philosophy of the Pax Romana. Moral values were obtained from reason, and the predominant theory was that all people belong to a common humanity. And that's what ruled this time of happiness, this 200-year period of Roman peace. So much work got done in that time period. There were new roads and public works, and urban culture began to develop. Conditions improved for slaves and women, and an orderly world community began to develop. And one of the other things that Augustus is known for as well was keeping the unemployed busy with entertainment. We'll talk a little more about that in a moment. This is incredible marble architecture still standing today. So the Roman culture and law during the Pax Romana continued to develop, but literature and history grew to its cultural high point under Augustus, and themes of Rome's history were highlighted. They even made fun of some of the past emperors and stuff, which was really kind of neat, that they could kind of laugh about it, they could learn from it, and they could go on. It also made things seem a little less serious from an emperor's standpoint, and made these emperors seem more like people, which again was the focus of Stoicism, that everyone's just a person. As I mentioned, the Stoicism as being important to the Pax Romana, the moral values were obtained from reason, and all people belong to a common humanity, even women. And this is Livia. She was a woman. She was Octavian's third wife, or Augustus's third wife. He believed that she was so intelligent that he often asked for her input in government matters. And I wanted to bring that up especially because most of the time throughout history courses, we talk about how women have very little input. But during the period of Stoicism, where all people are valued, we have this man showing his wife is valued. The peace of the Pax Romana contributed to a number of advancements in Rome's culture. There was more focus on science, and Ptolemy declared that the earth was the center of the universe. Galen began investigating medicine and studying anatomy, and in engineering advancements, the Romans built many of the finest roads and bridges in the ancient world, including aqueducts. I'll show you a picture in just a minute. And they also shifted focus to natural law, which focused on that more equality of society. One of the interesting things about the Pax Romana is that, remember, the Romans had basically been warring people. So all of this peace left them a little restless. So they turned to gladiator-style entertainment to satisfy that bloodlust that was kind of part of their nature. How ironic is that? So when I mentioned that Augustus offered entertainment to his people, there were shows, live shows, that sort of thing, but there was also gladiator-style entertainment, which always makes me think about video games, right? We still have people debating that today. A lot of people say video games lead to violence, but gladiator style fighting in the Pax Romana seems to disprove that whole idea, because there were peaceful times without violence, yet they created violence for entertainment, and they surely didn't have video games back then. Okay, and I mentioned the aqueducts. So these would stretch for miles, and they deliver water. I mean, they're covered. You can't see water lines running through here, but these ran so far, and they would take water from one area to another. The thing about that is they had to really be planned so that the slant would be right, so that the water could get from one place to another. So there were some signs that the Pax Romana was coming to a close, although no one can deny that 200 years of peace is a pretty dang good run. First of all, there was not a lot of economic expansion. There was also a big difference between city life and country life, this really wide gap between rich and poor. Even though everyone valued each other as humans, that gap was still pretty obvious. The vast difference started forming discontent, or this vast difference started forming discontent. So with this unhappiness, the Romans began kind of going back to their mythology and their mystery religions from the Eastern culture. And this is the Colosseum in Rome, built by Vespasian, the emperor, and his sons, Titus and Domitian. And let's see, what else we got to talk about? The decline of Rome. Okay, so in the 3rd century BC, Rome saw degeneration of its military and the beginning of civil war. We see this resurgence of Persia and Germanic tribes coming into Rome. Cities lost their freedoms and peasants were pretty much returned to serfdom again. So the Huns pushed Germanic tribes into the Roman territory and economic conditions got worse. The empire began falling apart and Rome was repeatedly invaded and looted. One of the things about these Germanic tribes too, the Germanic tribes were not focused on city life. They were focused on rural life. So another reason that Rome's cities fell really hard. There were spiritual considerations as well, civic spirit. You know, when you're defeated, you feel defeated, right? I mean, they had been beaten so many times, Rome had been beaten so many times and looted, and they just felt like their integrity and dignity had been robbed from them. So it was hard to recover from that. Okay, let's see. We had the last one. Overall, Rome left a rich legacy that helped preserve Greek wisdom. Roman law is still the basis for legal codes in most European states today. Also important during this time, we didn't really talk about it here in this chapter, but Christianity is born in the Roman Empire, and the Latin language lived long after the empire's fall because the church fathers used Latin to record and share Christianity with it. So that wraps up chapter 4. As always, if you have any questions, drop me an email.